Sam was telling me, he was getting nostalgic. He said he texted his mother this morning, Happy Mother's Day, and then he said that, it's too bad he's not here, and then he said, almost with a tear in his eye, how his mother had prayed for him almost every day. And he said, this was your prayer: may God help you if you ever do that again. That's completely apocryphal. He didn't tell me that. I was just hoping he was here so I could provoke him. You'll have to tell him later. Well, happy Mother's Day. I hope that you have a chance to greet your mother, or at least if you can't greet her, to express appreciation in your heart. Our readings for Mother's Day is always completely unfair because the readings work so well for Mother's Day and they dovetail with the theme of Mother's Day so well. That's not the case with Father's Day. With Mother's Day we get this text, we get, I am the vine, you are the branches, the command to love, and then Father's Day it says something like, we always get something like, if you love Father and Mother more than me, you're not worthy of me. So this text is perfect for Mother's Day. Apparently it was the mothers of the church who established the readings of the disciple. Our reading picks up in this long night that Jesus is betrayed, speech that he's giving. And if you remember last week, it's a continuation of that. He began by saying, I am the vine and you are the branches. And it continues on, this idea of abiding or connection, this vital connection that we have with one another. And I think that's, of course, a perfect text for today. We are connected to Christ in the same way, more profoundly, but in the same way that a good mother is connected to her children. Now, I realize that not every mother feels this way for their children, but most, of course, would sacrifice their lives any given moment for the life of their child. I came across this anonymous piece that described the feelings that most mothers may relate to. Her words say it better than I can, so I'm going to read it. It's a little bit longer. I'll try to summarize some of the parts. She says, we are sitting at lunch when my daughter casually mentions that she and her husband are thinking of starting a family. We're taking a survey, she says half-jokingly. Do you think I should have a baby? It will change your life, I said carefully, trying to keep a neutral tone. Oh, I know, she says. No more sleeping in on weekends, no more spontaneous vacations. And I begin to reflect. That's not what I meant at all. I look at my daughter, trying to decide what to tell her. I want her to know what she will never learn in childbirth classes. I want to tell her that the physical wounds of childbearing will heal, but that becoming a mother will leave in her something so raw that she will always be vulnerable. I consider wondering and warning her that she will never again read a newspaper and look at the stories of devastation without saying, what if that had been my child? Every plane crash, every house fire will haunt you. When we see the pictures of starving children, we go immediately to how unimaginable it is to lose a child. I look at her carefully. Manicured nails and stylish suit. And I think that no matter how sophisticated she will be, becoming a mother at times will reduce her to a primitive level of a bear protecting her cubs. And that urgent call of, Mom! will cause her to drop a souffle over Best Crystal without a moment's hesitation. I feel that I should warn her, sitting there so pretty, that no matter how many years she's invested in her career, that she probably will even want it to be derailed. She might arrange for childcare, but one day she'll be going into an important business meeting and she'll think of her baby's sweet smell. And it'll take every ounce of self-discipline to keep her from running from the building. I want my daughter to know that everyday decisions that seem so easy now will no longer be routine. The 5-year-old boy's desire to go to the big boy's bathroom at the McDonald's will present a major dilemma. That right there in the clattering of trays and screaming of children, issues of independence and gender identity will be weighed against the prospect of a monster lurking in that bathroom. However decisive she is in her career, she will forever second-guess herself. Looking at my attractive daughter, I want to assure her that eventually she will shed the pounds of pregnancy. That seems to be her biggest concern. but she will never ever feel the same about herself again. That her life now, so important, will be of less value to her once she has a child, and that she would give it up in a moment's notice if her offspring needed it, but will also begin to bring hope for more years, not to accomplish her own dreams, but to see her child accomplish theirs. And her relationship with her husband, it'll change. The things that today seem so unromantic, like changing diapers and powdering a baby, will be reasons eventually to fall in love again. I wish my daughter could sense the bond that she will feel with women throughout history who have tried to stop things like war and injustice and prejudice and drunk driving. I hope then she will understand why I'm so rational about most things in the decisions in my life, but become temporarily insane when I discuss the threat of nuclear war to all children. I want to describe to my daughter the exhilaration of seeing your child take the first bike ride. I want to capture her for the belly laugh of a baby who's touching the soft fur of a dog or a cat for the first time. I want her to taste the joy that is so real it actually pains me. My quizzical daughter's look makes me realize that tears have formed in my eyes and that I've sat silent for a moment. Finally, I speak aloud. Oh, you'll never regret it. Then I reach across the table and squeeze her hand and offer a silent prayer for her and for me and for all mere mortal women who stumble their way into the most wonderful of callings, this blessed gift from God, that of being a mother. That says it all, doesn't it? When you care that deeply, when you are that connected, whether you are a mother or a father or a child, it speaks of how God longs to be connected to us, but only a shadow's way. For Christ longs to forever be connected to us. He uses this image that lies beyond our gospel, that He is the vine and we are the branches. Think of that vital connection. If you trim a vine off, the branch off the vine, it will not survive. We are connected to Christ in a vital way, the way a child is connected to a parent, or in the words of our lesson, I am the vine, you are the branches, abide in me, draw life from me. Love has incredible power, doesn't it? I did a wedding last night, so I'm bathed in it. Do I look different? Do I glow from new love? I was standing close to it, like Moses in the Shekinah, when he's standing close to God. He glows, with God's glory. Do I glow with new love? I was thinking of a Peanuts cartoon, of course. The little girls call Charlie Brown on the telephone. Marcy and I are leaving for camp, Chuck. You know who that is. It's Lucy, of course. We're going to be swimming instructors. Marcy takes the phone. You know Marcy is sort of the one that Charlie Brown's sweet on. And she adds, we just called to say goodbye, Charles. We're going to miss you. We love you. And the perennial loser, Charlie Brown, stands stunned with the phone by his face with this huge, silly grin on his face. And Linus, of course, says, who is that? Charlie Brown answers, I think it was a right number. Love is always the right number in our lives. Jesus was speaking to you and to me, not in metaphorical ways, not in a parable, but in actuality, when He says to follow me, means to follow this command, to love one another. It is the litmus test that bears itself out in the life of the church. Love is supposed to be the mark of us, Christians in the world. It was for the first 2 centuries, and that's how the known world came to Christ. Tertullian, the 2nd century writer, summed up the way that the world saw Christians. Look, they said, look at how they love one another. Would the casual observer today be able to conclude the same thing about this church, about the church, and about the content and quality of our following of the one who gave Himself for love's sake? Could we be convicted of such loving? Would it be possible for a hungry soul to come into this fellowship and leave feeling as if nobody cares? How well do we measure up to the commandment of Christ in our gospel today? We know that love has an awesome power. Love is more than a feeling. As I said last night at the wedding of Michelle Larson, Button Terry's daughter, and Paul Rose, I said, love cannot be sustained by romanticism and grand gestures. Not that they ought to be absent either. They just can't be the only thing. Grand gestures of love are empty if they don't have a foundation of a myriad of simpler, small things. I went on to name a few, like taking out the garbage, cleaning the bathroom, taking time to listen and to respond. Without those simple things, grand gestures ring empty. David Lose, who's a seminary professor at Lutheran Seminary, linked the idea of love and obedience like this. Love is also about obedience, and every act of obedience ought also be an act of love. Now, I know that sounds like I'm speaking in two directions at once. When you're invited to obey, you need to ask whether what you are being asked to do in your obedience is also loving. Does it benefit another person? Does it build up the larger body? Does it also lead you to be more truly who you were created to be? Bonhoeffer, I think, is instructive here. He said, a person of duty will do his duty even to the devil. In other words, blind obedience can serve many masters. It doesn't always serve God. And so we must measure our obedience by our loving, and our loving in our obedience. And love does at times call us to sacrifice. But when we think about sacrifice, we get it mixed up. We think it means it diminishes us. But that's not what Christ meant. Sacrificing for another person doesn't leave us being less a person. At its best, sacrificial love invites us to live more fully into the kind of person that we were meant to be. Think about it this way. Was Christ diminished by his sacrifice on the cross? Do you think less of him because of what he gave for us? Is he less of a person because of what he did for us? No. He's more of who he was supposed to be because he did these things. I think that's what Jesus meant when he said, "This is my commandment, that you love one another just as I have loved you. No one has greater love than this, than to lay down their life for their friends." Jesus isn't who he is called to be in this life because he didn't give something up. He is who he's supposed to be because he did give it up. I know it's complicated, and oftentimes sacrifice and obedience, they can lead to abuse, of course. Not all sacrifices are holy ones. But when I look at some of the loving sacrifices that have been made for me, from parents, from my wife, or ones that I have made for others, they were never leaving me feeling disgraced or devalued by those sacrifices. Actually, they helped me understand myself and live more fully into who I was meant to be, even if I didn't know it at the time. So we're to measure our love and obedience together in this way. We'll have a much better idea whether the obedience is a coercive act of obedience, or if obedience is actually loving. The problem is, of course, that those of us who abide in a relationship with love with God, and who, because of this command and our affection for Christ, do also love our neighbors. And we find ourselves changed by that in surprising ways. Have you ever been changed by caring for someone that you thought it was impossible to be changed by? If you haven't been working hard enough. And you haven't put yourself in the right places. At times, we're called to stand up against injustice that others are facing. At other times, we're called to kneel down and to serve and help the poor. Still at other times, it means to challenge ourselves to see things and to see persons in new ways. I heard a disturbing report from Barna Research. Barna Research is a Christian sociological group, and it found this, that 90% of young people today consider the main stance of the church is against homosexuals. Now, it didn't mean that that's a philosophical point of view, but we are against people. A whole class of people. Now, I don't know about you, but I find that kind of disturbing. That the perception of the church is that our primary way of understanding is over and against someone. It doesn't even matter who the someone is. but the perception is that we're against something. When we have a Lord who calls us to be known by one thing and one thing only, and that is love, not what we're against. It's dangerous when people spend half an hour trying to define themselves what they aren't. You know what it means? They don't know who they are. I wonder if we haven't lost ourselves in this and haven't lost our identity in Christ, who calls us to love on behalf of a world that needs to know it's loved by God. Sometimes loving others changes us. It changes how we see them. It changes how we see ourselves. And we receive in it God's challenge to be who He's called us to be. At times, we need to have our minds changed, our positions challenged, our behaviors changed. Well, it was almost Mother's Day. I was going to tell this story about Sam, but he's not in here, so it's Mavis. Mavis still hadn't found herself a card. She had a hard time finding something appropriate because she had her mother just had not had the closest kind of relationship. Mavis has shared her dilemma with a friend at work, and her friend told her that it was only natural to have mixed feelings about the people that are close to us. I mean, we know so much about them. They know so much about us. And we have such high expectations of our mothers. Sometimes it's almost a guarantee that they're bound to let us down. Mavis merely just snorted at that. Her mother let her down all the time. And Jenna saw that Mavis needed some wiser counsel, and she said, whenever I'm having a problem like this I can't quite figure out, I ask God for help. And so that's what Mavis did. She prayed that God would show her the card that she needed. Well, it had been several days, and it got very near Mother's Day when finally Mavis made her way back to the store, and there were only about 30 Mother's Day cards left on the shelf. And with great anticipation and prayer, mindful that she had been asking God to direct her to the perfect card, did God lead her to the perfect card? She put her hand out and picked one out that had gold print on the cover. It was pretty, and she picked it up and she began to read the cover, and it said, "To my daughter, on Mother's Day." Oh, that won't do, Mavis thought. That's just not right. I'm not buying a card for my daughter. I'm buying a card for my mother. But then she pictured her mother standing at the card rack, trying to find a card for her. She remembered all those birthday cards that she had received throughout all those many years that her mother had given to her that said something like this on the cover: "To my wonderful daughter." And then she began to think, I'm not always a very wonderful daughter, and certainly not as wonderful as the card had suggested. And suddenly, a new thought began to rise in Mavis. She had prayed that God would send her the right card, and God did. Maybe God was saying something to her. Mavis put the card back, found a blank card with a bouquet of flowers on the cover. Inside she wrote a very simple message. It was from her heart. "To my mother on Mother's Day, thank you for being you. With love from your friend, imperfect and friend, daughter." Jesus told us, "As the Father has loved me, so I love you. Abide in my love." There are few better words for a day like this one when we lift up human relatedness and to hear about how we are called to abide with each other and reflect for each other God's love through the brokenness of our lives, and like a mirror that shattered can still reflect light and in many ways make it more beautiful. We can, through our own imperfections, share that love with one another. Jesus modeled it for us in a life of love and self-sacrifice that didn't diminish him, but made him more of who he was supposed to be. Like all good mothers and fathers and grandmothers and grandfathers and aunts and uncles and stepmoms and step-parents and step-siblings, we are to reflect this love. Because God loves us, we are to love one another. Because he has forgiven us, we are challenged to forgive one another. At the very center of the gospel, at the center of the Bible, is a God of self-sacrificing love who continues to reach out for his wonderful and imperfect children. It also involves a call for us to obedience, to his command to love in this broken world, and for love to be applied to every one of our acts of obedience. May God guide our steps. May God be in our relating to each other, even in our imperfections, and shine through us so that the world might know, even in us and back to us, that there is a God of love and a God of hope for the world today. Amen.